This is GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. This is flyer number 357, entitled Why Masculism Threatens Some Men. This is part 3. So continuing straight on. 9. Men feel ideologically powerless without masculism. Most men feel powerless when confronted by an angry, vindictive feminist, particularly of the utterly obnoxious type labelled feminazis by the masculists. Such men, that is, virtually all men, just don't have the intellectual tools to hurl back at feminazis, so tend to avoid confrontation with such women by just keeping quiet or just slinking away. It's not a pleasant experience for a man to be harangued by an angry feminist who thinks that he is a male chauvinist pig, a toxic male, a gender oppressor, a rapist, etc. It's therefore not surprising that most men don't confront feminists in public, in meetings, at work, in conversations, etc. However, with well-informed masculists, that is a very different story. Masculists see feminists as monoconscious, that is, these women have only had their feminist consciousnesses raised and know nothing about how women oppress men. To become biconscious, women need, by definition, to have their masculist consciousnesses raised as well. But for 99.99% of women, that masculist consciousness raising lies in the future. Nearly all feminists today, that's 2020, are monoconscious. Hence, they are angry at men, see men as the oppressors of women, and hence feel they have the right to be angry at men, and are angry at men. When such women are confronted for the first time with a well-informed, highly intelligent, highly articulate masculist, they are in for a brutal awakening as they are harangued out of the room by that masculist, who tells them in no uncertain terms that monoconscious, fluffy feminist hypocrites have taken over the divorce courts and made divorce, marriage, and particularly paternity so toxic for males that indirectly these fluffy feminist hypocrites are indirect genociders, because it is they who are indirectly wiping out whole populations by having made modern marriage such a shitty deal for men that in many Western countries now, 2/3 of young men reject marriage, reject paternity, and spend their money on themselves. That is, they have chosen to be MGTOWs. I have been in several such confrontations with real feminazis. It is supremely shocking for such women. They have had a monopoly over gender politics all their lives. So when confronted with a very angry masculist who uses his superior male intellect and greater male verbal aggression, these women usually get very scared, shocked, disoriented, not knowing how to behave due to the novelty of the experience. They have never been confronted by an angry masculist before in their whole lives. Once millions of men have had their masculist consciousnesses raised, women will become used to being harangued by masculisted men and will have to adapt to it. Young women will be strongly influenced by this growing hatred by men of feminazis and will become much nicer to men, because young women want a man to pay for her to have kids. Being a careerist and a mother of toddlers at the same time is impractical. So young women quickly learn that the rise of masculism and MGTOW is very threatening to them, and that they had better quickly learn to be nicer to men or they won't have a baby, the ultimate disaster to most women. 10. Masculism will impact negatively on population size. Some more thoughtful men argue that masculism has profound consequence on the population size. If a high proportion of men go masculist and MGTOW, then that will cause the birth rate to plummet, and the total population then falls over time potentially wiping it out altogether, an obvious catastrophe. So for the good of society, masculism and MGTOW should be outlawed, such men think. There is some logic in the above view, and given its force, it can be used to good effect by the politically minded masculist theorists. Masculists argue that if the gender laws are not made men fair, for example in the divorce courts, bringing in the that's paternity rejection right, etc., then masculists and MGTOWs will continue to boycott paternity, crashing the birth rate, so that ultimately society is forced to men fair the gender laws. Masculists will also argue to women that women must vote together with men for the men fairing of the gender laws. Otherwise, men will continue to reject women's desires to be mothers. Thus, the fear of the thoughtful men who worry about the longer-term impact of the masculists and MGTOWs on the population size should be supporting the masculists in the men fairing of the gender laws so that men can be persuaded to be fathers again. Once women are nurturative fips and the gender laws have been men faired, then many men will want to be fathers again. Because for many men, there are real rewards in seeing one's kids grow up. We evolved to enjoy raising our kids, but the hated feminazis have made modern marriage and paternity so toxic that they are forcing millions of young men to reject both for their own survival and sanity. If men fear for the birth rate, then they should become masculists themselves to push for the earlier implementation of the men fairing of the gender laws. 11. Masculism will impact negatively on the economy. Thoughtful men will also be worried and fearful of the major impact on the economy when millions of men go masculist and MGTOW. A single man who is a masculist, who lives the MGTOW lifestyle, will typically spend only on himself, so will often work less hours per week, or work hard for some decades, save hard, then retire in his 40s, spending the rest of his life doing what he loves and not being a manslave to a fluffy parasite. When millions of men go masculist and MGTOW, the economy will obviously crash. This worries many thoughtful men and governments. Masculists use the same counter-argument as in the previous point, that is, that more men should become masculists and MGTOWs so that the gender laws are men faired faster, so that more men are prepared to be fathers, given equal rights with women, especially in the divorce courts, and seeing women become nurturative fips. Most young men today think that if they are stupid enough to marry and have kids, they will face a 1 in 4 chance of having their kids ripped away from them. Fuck that is the typical reaction. So they decide it's better for them not to marry, not to have kids, and to spend their money on themselves, and fuck the feminazi genociders. 12. Masculism will immiserate women. If the gender laws are not soon men faired, then it is certain that a lot of women will be immiserated in many senses, that is, made poorer financially and made miserable psychologically by angry, bitter masculists and MGTOWs. We are currently at a historical turning point comparable to the situation faced by the US abolitionists in the 1800s. When they became conscious of what a moral abomination Negro slavery was. Masculists argue in the 21st century that manslavery is a moral abomination that has to be destroyed with a sex war if necessary. Men gave women the contraceptive pill and modern medicine, so women are living into their mid-80s and having 0, 1 or 2 kids, so have a career window of some half a century. So the masculists are putting enormous moral pressure on women to fib up, to pull their financial weight by bothering to get a career competent education so that they become responsible fips as adults, not expecting to be able to parasite off the labour and money of a man. Most women today have a deeply held expectation that, once again,
men exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies.
Millions, if not billions of women will go through a lot of pain as millions of masculists rise up, accuse women of being fluffy parasitic vermin who are to be wiped out by removing their fluffy parasite genes from the gene pool, by being totally ignored, not even being pumped and dumped, thus being exterminated. This rise of masculist thought is of historic importance. It will change the way societies run and cause a huge amount of pain to women as they are forced to adjust to masculist moral pressure, as women learn to accept masculist demands for gender equality and gender fairness. Women have no choice about this, since men have the economic power, since nearly all men are FIPS, raised to be FIPS, even evolved to be FIPS, whereas a fluffy, that's a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the money of a man, can only be a fluffy if she can get her financial claws into some gullible manslave. But masculism and MGTOW is killing off the supply of such gullible manslaves as men wake up to being sexploited by parasitic females. Masculism forces women to grow up, to fip up, or be severely punished, spat at, socially rejected if they don't. So this historical transition, although very painful for women, is inevitable, given the fact that women can now work, so must work. Anything else is manslavery and hence murderously contemptible in the eyes of the masculists. Thus those men who fear for the immiseration of women need to see the bigger picture of the liberation of men from manslavery, of being treated as cash machines by women. In the masculist view, such women are vermin to be wiped out, so women's immiseration in the eyes of the masculists is women's own fault and is deserved. Fluffy manslavers are seen by masculists as immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin. If the gender laws are not soon men-fared, women won't just be immiserated, they will be killed in large numbers in a sex war. Remember the US Civil War, which was largely about the immorality of slavery. The masculists argue that manslavery is slavery. Slavery rouses passions. Slavery is a war issue. Manslavery is a war issue to the masculists, and the masculists are at war against the hated fluffy parasites and the even more hated fluffy feminists, who behave as feminists in the parliaments but as fluffy parasites in the divorce courts, thus making them utter hypocrites in the eyes of the masculists, wanting equal rights with men but rejecting equal obligations with men by not bothering to get a career-competent education, so that women become morally responsible FIPS as adults, not expecting to be manslavers of men. From the masculist point of view, these two groups of women should be immiserated because they deserve it. To masculists, they are vermin, the way slavers of Negroes were vermin to the abolitionists in the US. To rid the US of Negro slavery took a war, the US Civil War. To rid the planet of manslavery, it may mean a sex war. That would certainly immiserate women. ... The above dozen suggested answers to the question, why do some men feel threatened by masculism, is just the tip of the iceberg. To readers of this flyer, you are probably thinking of other reasons why men feel threatened, and that's good. This flyer is just to get the ball rolling, to motivate further thinking on this very big question. Masculism will impact on the minds of millions and later billions of men, and indirectly on a similar number of women, so there will be plenty of future discussion on these big questions. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Manslaves to Women, an e-textbook of 350 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.